What if the music you grew up loving was built on untold truths hidden for decades? Legendary voices, massive hits, but silent identities, locked away by fear, stigma, and industry secrets. Who was the first superstar to hide their truth behind the hits? Guess in the comments. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell for more untold stories. Let's find out about the first star on our list of 25 black musicians you didn't know were gay. Little Richard, the fire that refused to hide. Before rock had a name, before Elvis shook his hips on national television, there was a skinny black boy from Macon, Georgia, who already sounded like freedom. Richard Wayne Penniman was born into a house ruled by scripture and silence. The church taught him how to shout. The world taught him how to shrink. He was flamboyant, loud, glittering in a place that punished difference. By 15, home could no longer contain him. He left with nothing but a voice sharp enough to cut through brass bands and hypocrisy alike. When Tutti Frutti exploded in 1955, it wasn't just a hit record. It was a detonation, wild rhythm, sweat-drenched piano, a sound so electric it made America blush. Stadiums filled, charts bent, white artists borrowed his style and softened it for safer audiences. But Little Richard, he was too black, too bold, too unapologetically himself. And underneath the mascara and the scream was a secret the world pretended not to see. Richard loved men. He didn't always whisper it. In certain interviews, especially in the 80s and early 2000s, he spoke openly. Other times, he condemned homosexuality from the pulpit, calling it sin. He would leave music to become a minister, then leave the church to return to the stage, then renounce it again. It wasn't hypocrisy. It was war, a war between faith and desire, between survival and truth. In the 1950s, being a gay black man wasn't scandalous. It was dangerous. Careers ended for less. Lives were destroyed quietly. So Richard performed inside a paradox, screaming liberation while privately wrestling with shame. The industry took his sound and crowned others king. Elvis became the king of rock and roll. The Beatles studied him. James Brown mirrored him. But the architect stood slightly outside the frame, too queer to fully embrace, too radical to comfortably celebrate. And yet, the fire never went out. He was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in its very first class. He received a Lifetime Achievement Grammy. The pioneers eventually had to bow. When he died in 2020 at 87, the world remembered the glitter, the howl, the piano. But the deeper legacy is this. Little Richard didn't just invent a sound. He invented the audacity to be loud in a world that demanded silence. The question isn't whether he changed music. He did. The real question is, if he were born today, would he still have to fight himself to be free? Sylvester, the disco saint who danced without permission. Long before pride flags filled stadium tours, there was Sylvester, glowing under disco lights like a prophecy the world wasn't ready to understand. He was born in Los Angeles in 1947, raised in a strict Pentecostal home where gospel music was holy and anything feminine in a boy was treated like danger. But Sylvester never learned how to hide. Even as a child, he moved differently, softer, brighter, unapologetic. Makeup didn't scare him. A soprano voice didn't shame him. He carried femininity like armor. By the time he reached San Francisco, the city of outsiders, he found his first real stage, drag, avant-garde performance, queer freedom pulsing through underground rooms. He wasn't playing a character. He was revealing the truth. Then came 1978. You Make Me Feel Mighty Real. It wasn't just a song. It was liberation set to a four-on-the-floor beat. Gospel vocals collided with electronic ecstasy, and suddenly queer joy had an anthem. In clubs filled with black and brown LGBTQ people searching for safety, Sylvester wasn't entertainment. He was survival. He stepped onto national television in sequins and eyeliner, refusing to shrink himself into something palatable. He didn't code his identity. He didn't soften it. He declared it. In a world where being openly gay could end everything, Sylvester made it the center of his stardom. But the mainstream treated him like a spectacle, a novelty. Radio kept its distance. Industry executives didn't know what to do with a black man who sang like an angel and dressed like freedom. And then the epidemic came. The 1980s stole an entire generation. Friends disappeared. Lovers vanished. The dance floor became a memorial. Sylvester himself was diagnosed with HIV in 1986. 2 years later, he was gone, only 41. But even in death, he made a final statement. His estate was left to aid charities. His ashes scattered as if to say, "My life was never just mine. It was for everyone who needed proof that they could exist loudly." Sylvester didn't just sing disco. He turned joy into resistance. And even now, every time that beat returns, so does he. Ma Rainey, the mother of the blues who refused to whisper, before record labels decided whose voice mattered, before radio sanitized desire. There was Ma Rainey, commanding tents, stages, and entire towns with growl that sounded like lived truth. Born Gertrude Pridgett in 1886 in Columbus, Georgia, she came of age in the Deep South, where race and respectability were tightly policed. By the time she adopted the name Ma Rainey, she wasn't just a performer, she was a force. Traveling minstrel and vaudeville circuits became her kingdom. Dusty tents turned into cathedrals of blues. When she began recording in the 1920s, she didn't polish pain, she documented it. Over 90 songs in just 5 years. Her voice was thick, earthy, unapologetically Southern. She sang about betrayal, poverty, survival, but she also sang about something far more dangerous. Desire. Rumors followed her everywhere. Relationships with women, chorus girls, dancers. In 1925, after she was allegedly arrested for hosting an all-women gathering, she responded the only way she knew how, through music. Prove It On Me blues. They say I do it, ain't nobody caught me, sure gotta prove it on me. It wasn't denial, it was defiance. In a segregated America where black women were already pushed to the margins, Ma Rainey layered another act of rebellion on top. She refused to hide her queerness, gold teeth flashing, satin gown shimmering. She toured with her own band and custom bus. She controlled her business. She owned her narrative. She was the boss in rooms built to silence her. Male blues artists were celebrated as pioneers. Ma Rainey built the road they walked on. And in doing so, she carved space for Bessie Smith, for Billie Holiday, for generations of women who would sing love songs without asking permission about who they loved. She retired quietly in 1935 and died just 4 years later. No dramatic headlines, no national mourning. But listen closely to the roots of blues, to the fearless women who came after. Her fingerprints are everywhere. Ma Rainey didn't ask society to understand her. She dared it to keep up. Bessie Smith, the empress who loved without apology. Bessie Smith didn't enter the spotlight gently. She kicked the door down. Born in Chattanooga in 1894, she rose from poverty into a world that offered black women almost nothing except struggle. But Bessie had a voice too massive to ignore. It wasn't sweet. It wasn't delicate. It was thunder wrapped in velvet. The sound of survival turned into song. By the 1920s, she became the highest paid black entertainer in America. Crowds packed theaters just to hear her open her mouth. Downhearted Blues sold hundreds of thousands of copies, an impossible number for the time. She wore jewels like armor, gowns like royalty, traveling in her own private train car as if to declare, "I belong everywhere you said I never could." They called her the Empress of the Blues, and she ruled. But off stage, Bessie lived just as boldly as she sang. Her love life was messy, fierce, uncontainable. She was married to Jack G., but the marriage burned with jealousy and betrayal. And Bessie loved beyond the rules. Men, women, whoever she wanted. Her bisexuality wasn't a rumor in her world. On the vaudeville circuit, it was an open secret. She didn't shrink from it. She didn't perform respectability. She lived like a woman who knew tomorrow was never promised. That same fire made her dangerous. Stories followed her. Bessie standing up to racist violence, even reportedly fighting off men who tried to disrupt her shows. When Ma Rainey faced trouble, Bessie used her influence to protect her. These women weren't just singers. They were shields for each other in a brutal world. But fame is fragile. The Great Depression shifted the music industry. Opportunities faded. The crown grew heavier. And then, in 1937, everything ended on a dark road. Bessie died in a car accident at only 43. A legend gone too soon. Later, a myth spread that she was refused treatment because she was black. A story debunked, but revealing something deeper. America could not imagine a black woman die without injustice attached, because injustice was always nearby. Bessie Smith gave the world heartbreak anthems, but she also gave it something rarer. A life lived without apology. A love that refused to be edited. A voice that still echoes like truth itself. Billy Strayhorn, the genius behind the curtain. Some legends don't stand center stage. They build the stage itself. Billy Strayhorn was born in 1915 and raised in Pittsburgh, a quiet child with classical ear and a mind far beyond his years. He loved Bach. He loved Debussy. And in a country that barely tolerated black excellence, let alone black queerness, he dreamed of composing symphonies. Instead, history placed him beside Duke Ellington. When Strayhorn met Ellington in 1938, he didn't audition. He arrived prepared. Within minutes, he was showing the band how to rearrange a piece at the piano. That confidence earned him more than a job. It earned him proximity to greatness. But proximity is not the same as recognition. Billy wrote Take the A Train, the song that became Ellington's signature. He composed Lush Life at just 18 years old, a haunting meditation on loneliness so mature it felt lived in. He co-wrote and arranged countless pieces that shaped American jazz forever. Yet his name rarely appeared in lights. Part of it was personality. Strayhorn was reserved, precise, uninterested in spectacle. But part of it was the truth he carried openly in private spaces. He was a gay black man in 1940s America. He didn't deny it. He lived with male partners. He moved within New York's progressive circles. Ellington protected him when he could, but the world outside that bubble was less forgiving. Visibility had consequences. Credit was complicated. So Strayhorn became the architect in shadow. His music, though, betrayed everything he felt. Lush Life aches with isolation. The harmonies feel like someone searching for belonging in rooms that only half open their doors. His composition spoke what interviews never did. He was also active in the civil rights movement, raising money for Dr. King, using art as quiet resistance. In 1967, esophageal cancer took him at just 51. Ellington recorded an entire tribute album in his honor. Too late for Billy to hear it. Billy Strayhorn didn't crave the spotlight. But without him, the spotlight would have sounded different. And maybe that's the deepest tragedy. Not that he was hidden, but that he was essential. Frankie Knuckles, the architect of the dance floor. Some revolutions don't begin with speeches. They begin with a beat. Frankie Knuckles was born in the Bronx in 1955, but his destiny waited in Chicago, in a warehouse pulsing with bass after midnight. By the late 1970s, disco was dying in the mainstream. Radio was turning its back. But inside the warehouse club, something new was forming. It wasn't just music. It was sanctuary. Black and brown queer bodies filled the room. People rejected by families, churches, and systems that told them they were too much or not enough. And Frankie stood behind the turntables like a quiet guardian, stitching together soul, disco, gospel, and drum machines into something hypnotic. House music was born there. Long instrumental stretches. Repetition that felt like prayer. Breakdowns that released tears as easily as sweat. Frankie wasn't chasing hits. He was creating healing. On that dance floor, no one had to explain themselves. You didn't need permission to exist. You just moved. Openly gay, but never theatrical about it. Frankie let the music speak. His remix of Your Love became sacred text in clubs. Baby Wants a Ride carried political undertones. Sexuality, faith, civil rights, wrapped inside rhythm. Outside those walls, the world was harsher. The AIDS crisis loomed. Police targeted queer nightlife. Mainstream America didn't understand the culture being built in basements. But the sound spread. By the 1990s, house music circled the globe. Europe embraced it. DJs became stars. And in 1997, Frankie became the first recipient of the Grammy for Remixer of the Year, a quiet acknowledgement that the underground had reshaped the industry. Chicago named a street after him. When he passed in 2014 at 59, tributes poured in from artists, activists, and club kids who had grown up inside his frequencies. Frankie Knuckles didn't just spin records. He built a refuge out of rhythm. He turned nightlife into lifeline. He proved that sometimes the safest place in the world is a dance floor at 3 a.m. Johnny Mathis, the voice the world loved, the truth he had to hide. Johnny Mathis was the kind of singer America trusted. Born in Texas in 1935 and raised in San Francisco, he emerged in the late 1950s with a voice smooth as silk, romantic as candlelight. He didn't just sing love songs. He became the soundtrack of them. Chances are. Misty, records that played in living rooms, weddings, slow dances where people believed love was simple. His image was clean-cut, timeless, safe. And that was exactly the problem. Behind the velvet tenor was a man living inside carefully locked doors. For decades, Johnny guarded his private life with near-perfect discipline, not because he lacked pride, but because the era demanded silence. In mid-century America, being a black superstar was already complicated. Being a gay black superstar? Unthinkable. The industry wasn't built to hold that truth without punishment. Rumors floated, as they always do, but Mathis stayed graceful, elusive. In 1982, he briefly acknowledged his sexuality in an interview, calling it simply a way of life. The reaction was immediate. The statement was retracted. Pressure tightened. The message was clear: keep singing but don't speak. So he didn't. He continued performing, album after album, decade after decade, smiling through questions no one dared ask directly. While millions listened to him sing about devotion, very few understood the loneliness that can come from being adored but not fully known. It wasn't until the 2000s that Johnny spoke more openly, confirming what had long been whispered. By then, the culture had shifted enough for truth to survive. And still, he never sounded bitter. He received a Lifetime Achievement Grammy. He was inducted into the Great American Songbook Hall of Fame. His career became a monument of endurance, not just talent, but restraint. Johnny Mathis represents a generation of artists who didn't come out in triumphant headlines. They survived in quietness. Because sometimes the cost of honesty wasn't criticism. It was disappearance. And Johnny chose to remain, even if it meant the world only loved part of him. Luther Vandross, the love songs that hid his loneliness. When Luther Vandross sang, it felt like the world softened. Born in New York City in 1951, Luther wasn't just a vocalist. He was an atmosphere. His voice was velvet and ache, the kind of sound that made heartbreak feel beautiful. Songs like Never Too Much, Here and Now, and Dance with My Father didn't just climb charts. They became emotional landmarks in millions of lives. He gave people romance in perfect melody. But behind the perfection was distance. Luther was famously private. In an industry where artists overshared for fame, he held his personal life close, almost sealed. Rumors followed him for years, but he never confirmed anything publicly. Not because he lacked truth, but because truth, for a gay black man in R&B during the 1980s and 90s, came with consequences. R&B was built on heteronormative fantasy, love songs aimed at women, masculinity carefully packaged. Luther knew what the world wanted from him, and he delivered it flawlessly, but at a cost. Close friends later confirmed he was gay, yet Luther never spoke it aloud to the public. Some believe he feared losing his largely female fan base. Others point to the weight of family expectations, religion, and cultural stigma. Whatever the reason, the silence wasn't emptiness. It was survival. Biography suggests Luther carried deep loneliness. That unfulfilled love shaped many of his most aching lyrics. When he sang about longing, it didn't feel imagined, it felt lived. In 2003, at the height of his legacy, he suffered a massive stroke. The voice that had carried so many stories was suddenly fragile. Though he recovered briefly, he passed away in 2005 at only 54. The world mourned the loss of a legend. But there's another layer to Luther's story. The tragedy of giving the world a soundtrack for love, while never fully being allowed to live love freely in the open. Luther Vandross proved something haunting. Sometimes the greatest love songs are written by people still waiting to be loved back. Michelle and Digiocello, the truth that refused to be softened. Some artists chase acceptance. Michelle Ndigiocello chased truth. Born Michelle Lynn Johnson in 1968 and raised in Washington, D.C., she grew up between military discipline and musical freedom. The bass became her weapon. Thick, elastic, unapologetic. When her 1993 debut Plantation, Lullabies, arrived, it didn't ask for space. It took it. Funk collided with jazz. Hip-hop brushed against poetry. And beneath the groove was confrontation. Michelle was openly bisexual from the beginning. No dramatic coming-out arc. No reveal. She simply existed, writing about desire, race, faith, homophobia, and power with surgical honesty. At a time when black music was being neatly categorized for radio formats, she blurred every line. Her track, Leviticus, Faggot, didn't whisper. It addressed homophobia head-on, flipping scripture into resistance. Radio stations hesitated. Industry executives winced. But Michelle didn't dilute a single syllable. She wasn't interested in comfort. Her second album, Peace Beyond Passion, earned Grammy recognition, yet she never fully fit anywhere. Too queer for mainstream R&B, too black for indie alternative spaces, too political to be background music, and she refused to bend. On stage, her presence was grounded, almost meditative. Bass strapped low, voice steady, gaze unafraid. Off stage, she spoke about not feeling fully embraced by any one community. But isolation never translated into compromise. It translated into evolution. Across decades, she collected Grammy nominations, collaborated with icons like Madonna and Robert Glasper, and redefined what genre even meant. But perhaps her greatest achievement wasn't awards. It was permission. Permission for queer black women to create without shrinking. Permission to challenge systems instead of decorating them. Permission to be complicated. Michelle once said she wasn't interested in fitting into boxes. She wanted to blow them up. And she did, not with spectacle, not with scandal, but with bass lines so honest they vibrated through walls that tried to contain her. Frank Ocean, the letter that changed the silence. Frank Ocean didn't storm out of a closet. He wrote his way out. Born Christopher Edwin Breaux in 1987, he entered the industry quietly, penning songs for Beyoncé, Justin Bieber, and others before stepping into his own spotlight. His 2011 mixtape, Nostalgia, Ultra felt different, vulnerable, cinematic, masculinity but softer, desire but complicated. Then came July 2012. Days before releasing his debut album, Channel Orange, Frank posted an open letter on Tumblr. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't defensive. It was reflective. He wrote about his first love, a man, about unrequited affection, about learning to sit with feelings that didn't fit the script. Hip-hop and R&B froze. No major black male artist in those genres had ever publicly done that at the height of rising fame. The timing felt seismic. Some praised his courage. Others questioned his motives. Was it strategy? Was it marketing? Frank didn't argue. He simply released the album. Channel Orange debuted at number 2 and won a Grammy. Songs like Thinking About You and Bad Religion took on new weight. The longing in his lyrics was no longer abstract. It had a face. But with visibility came retreat. Frank grew more private, almost elusive. Few interviews, sparse appearances. Then in 2016, Blonde arrived, stripped down, experimental, fragile. It sounded like someone rebuilding identity on their own terms. It wasn't trying to prove anything. It just existed. Frank never clung to labels, never made sexuality his headline. He allowed ambiguity, fluidity, space. In doing so, he cracked something open. He showed that a black man in R&B could be vulnerable without losing strength. That masculinity didn't have to roar. It could whisper. Frank Ocean didn't give the world spectacle. He gave it honesty written in lowercase letters. And sometimes a quiet confession echoes louder than any anthem. Janelle Monáe, the future where freedom is loud. Janelle Monáe didn't enter music like a singer chasing fame. She arrived like a coded message from the future. Born in Kansas City in 1985, She built her world through science fiction, sharp suits, and cinematic mythologies. Early on, she wasn't just making albums. She was constructing universes. Metropolis, the Arcandroid, stories of androids, rebellion. Outsiders hunted for being different, but the metaphor was never subtle. Janelle was writing about race, gender, queerness, oppression. She was imagining a future where the marginalized weren't erased. They were the heroes. For years, she dodged questions about her personal life, not out of shame, but out of intention. She wanted to focus on the art, the message, the larger story. Her identity lived inside the music like a secret signal only some could decode. Then came 2018, ahead of her album Dirty Computer. She came out publicly as pansexual, and suddenly the world understood. The revolution she'd been singing about was also her own. Dirty Computer wasn't just an album. It was a celebration, a rebellion, a love letter to black queerness and sexual freedom wrapped in neon and defiance. Songs like Make Me Feel became instant queer anthems, pulsing with Prince-like electricity. The visuals were just as bold. Afrofuturism fused with LGBTQ politics. Pleasure fused with protest. The album earned a Grammy nomination for Album of the Year, not because it was safe, but because it was undeniable. Janelle didn't stop there. She became an outspoken advocate for queer rights, racial justice, climate action. And in 2022, she shared that she identifies as non-binary, embracing both she/her and they/them pronouns. Her journey mirrors the evolution of language itself, how the world is finally catching up to identities that have always existed. Janelle Monáe is proof of something powerful. The future isn't coming. For artists like her, the future is already here, wearing black and white, singing freedom through a sci-fi lens, and daring the world to evolve. Lil Nas X, the provocation that refused to apologize. Lil Nas X didn't wait for the industry to accept him. He forced it to react. Born Montero Lamar Hill in 1999, he understood the internet before he understood fame. When Old Town Road exploded in 2019, it wasn't supposed to last. A country trap meme song by a young black kid with Wi-Fi ambition. Instead, it broke records, 19 weeks at number 1. Then, at the height of that success, during Pride Month, he came out. No slow rollout, no crisis management. Just a tweet, subtle, direct, irreversible. Hip-hop and country, two spaces deeply rooted in hypermasculinity, suddenly had to confront a new reality. The biggest song in America belonged to a gay black man. But Lil Nas X didn't just come out. He escalated. Montero, Call Me By Your Name, wasn't coded. It was confrontational, sliding into hell on a stripper pole, reclaiming religious shame with theatrical audacity. Critics called it blasphemous. Fans called it liberating. He answered hate with humor, memes with strategy, glamour with defiance. Lil Nas X understood something earlier generations couldn't afford to. Visibility can be power. If you control the narrative, he didn't ask to be tolerated. He demanded to be seen. Tyler, the creator, the evolution no one saw coming. Tyler, the creator, built his career on chaos. Born in California in 1991, he burst onto the scene with shock value lyrics and raw aggression. Early projects were controversial, provocative, even accused of homophobia. He thrived on discomfort. But evolution is louder than outrage. By 2017's Flower Boy, something shifted. Beneath the layered production were confessions, subtle at first, then unmistakable. Lines about kissing white boys since 2004 weren't punchlines. They were admissions. Then came Igor in 2019, an album drenched in heartbreak over another man. It won a Grammy, but more importantly, it marked transformation. Tyler never labeled himself clearly. Sometimes playful, sometimes evasive. He refused tidy definitions. And maybe that's the point. His journey wasn't about a dramatic coming out. It was about growth, from shock to sincerity. Tyler proved that masculinity can evolve, that vulnerability can coexist with bravado, and that sometimes the most radical act is simply becoming who you are in real time. Big Phrygia, the bounce that broke the ceiling. Big Freedia didn't invent bounce music. She made the world hear it. Born in New Orleans in 1978, Freedia grew up singing in church before finding her true pulpit in the city's underground clubs. Bounce was already alive, raw, rhythmic, rooted in Black queer Southern culture, but it lived mostly in local spaces. Freedia took it global. With a booming voice, rapid-fire call-and-response, wigs, heels, and unstoppable energy, she turned every stage into revival. Openly gay and gender nonconforming, using she/her pronouns, Freedia blurred masculinity and femininity without apology. Mainstream America didn't always know what to do with her. Some reduced her to spectacle. Others missed a history embedded in bounce, a genre born from survival and joy in marginalized communities. But she kept rising. A reality show, major festival stages, collaborations with Beyoncé on Formation, and later Break My Soul. Suddenly, the underground pulse of New Orleans was shaking stadiums. Freedia faced personal loss, legal battles, industry doubt, but never softened her volume. Big Freedia didn't ask to fit into hip-hop. She expanded it. And every time a crowd shouts back on command, it's proof. Liberation can sound like bass so loud. It rattles the walls that try to keep you out. Saucy Santana, the strut into hip-hop's front door. Saucy Santana didn't ease into rap. He strutted in. Born in 1993 and raised in Florida, Santana first worked behind the scenes as a makeup artist for City Girls. But soon, his personality was too big to stay backstage. In 2019, his track Walk went viral on TikTok, not because he was trying to fit in, but because he refused to. Loud, flamboyant, razor-sharp, Santana brought something hip-hop still struggles with: unapologetic gay Black confidence in full glam, designer nails, fashion, no toning down. With hits like Material Girl, he became more than a viral moment. He became a cultural figure. But visibility brought backlash: homophobia, misogyny, constant online hate, critics calling him too much. Santana never shrank. He performed at major festivals, landed collaborations, and signed with RCA Records in 2022. What was once dismissed as internet noise became undeniable presence. Saucy Santana is building a career out of audacity, not asking if rap is ready, but forcing rap to look at him, in heels, in shine, in truth, and deal with it. I Love McConan, the closet door that cost him everything. I Love McConan was never meant to fit the mold. Born in 1989, he floated between rap and melody, mood and vulnerability long before it became mainstream. In 2014, his breakout hit Tuesday, with Drake turned him into a global name overnight. A new sound, a new star. The future looked wide open. Then, in 2017, he did something almost unheard of for an artist at his level in hip-hop. He came out as gay, not with a press tour, not with apology. Just a tweet, simple, direct, final. The response was complicated. Some praise his courage. But McConan later admitted something darker. The industry changed overnight. Collaborations vanished. Momentum stalled. Doors that had been opened suddenly went quiet. Not a public blacklist, just silence. And silence can be louder than rejection. McConan kept making music, leaning into independence, exploring isolation, mental health, resilience. But his story became a haunting question about hip-hop's limits. What happens when honesty costs you opportunity? I Love McConan didn't lose his talent. He lost the comfort of an industry that loved him best when he stayed unspoken. Serpent with Feet, the gospel of Black gay love. Serpent with Feet doesn't just sing, he conjures. Born Josiah Wise in 1988 in Baltimore, he was raised in a deeply religious home where church music was sacred and desire was often treated as sin. Gospel surrounded him, so did silence. But instead of running from that tension, he transformed it. When his music emerged in the 2010s, it didn't fit any box. Experimental R&B, classical echoes, spiritual intensity. His voice sounded like prayer and longing at once. What makes Serpent with Feet radical is not just that he is openly gay, it's that he treats Black gay love as holy. Songs from Soil and Deacon don't whisper intimacy, they exalt it. He flips religious imagery on its head, using the language of church not to condemn, but to celebrate tenderness between men. Some audiences feel uneasy. Mainstream radio stays distant. Erotic queer devotion wrapped in sacred tones is still too much for a world trained to separate faith from freedom. But Serpent doesn't perform for comfort. He writes for liberation. He once said he wants black gay men to feel seen, not studied. And in every note, he proves love is not a sin. It is a hymn. Cakes the Killer, the mic that refused to lower its voice. Cakes the Killer raps like he's been underestimated his entire life. Born Rashard Bradshaw in 1990, he emerged from New Jersey into a hip-hop scene that still treated openly gay rappers like contradictions. But Cakes didn't arrive politely. He arrived swinging. His 2013 mixtape The Eulogy earned critical praise for a reason. Sharp flow, battle-ready bars, club-ready beats. He wasn't asking to be the gay rapper. He was demanding respect as a rapper, period. Tracks like Goody Goodies and Don Dada blended nightlife bravado with queer desire, witty and unapologetic. He once said, "If I didn't say I was gay, people wouldn't care. But because I say it and don't water it down, it becomes a problem." Too queer for traditional rap gatekeepers. Too raw for pop polish. Still, he carved his own lane. His 2022 album Svengali Layered House, rap and introspection into something fearless and self-aware. It wasn't about shock. It was about control, of narrative, of power, of identity. Cakes the Killer doesn't want tolerance. He wants lyrical dominance. And every verse makes it clear he didn't break into hip-hop. He made hip-hop adjust. Mickey Blanco, the protest that became performance. Mickey Blanco is not just an artist. They are an eruption. Born in 1986 in California, Blanco emerged from the underground blending poetry, punk, performance art, and experimental hip-hop into something the mainstream couldn't categorize and didn't know how to contain. Gender fluid, fearless, confrontational. Mickey turned every track into a challenge. Early projects like Cosmic Angel weren't built for radio. They were built for revolution. But the bravest moment wasn't in a lyric. In 2015, Mickey publicly revealed they were HIV positive, a declaration almost unheard of in music, especially in hip-hop spaces still drenched in stigma. Instead of ending their career, it deepened their mission. Blanco's work became more than sound. It became survival. Their performances, wigs, combat boots, raw vulnerability, feel like protest in motion. Anger, joy, trauma, power all in one body. They've collaborated with global icons, toured worldwide, and still call out an industry that loves queer visibility without offering queer support. Mickey Blanco doesn't exist to be brave. They exist to be paid, respected, and heard. And their presence proves hip-hop can be a battlefield or a stage for transformation. Zebra Cats, the darkness the mainstream couldn't translate. Zebra Cats didn't enter hip-hop to the front door. He emerged from shadows. Born O.J. Morgan in 1987, Cats came from performance art before rap, bringing an aesthetic that felt industrial, minimalist, menacing. In 2012, everything shifted when designer Rick Owens used his track, I'm a Red, in a Paris runway show. Suddenly, queer black energy was booming through high fashion. I'm a Reed wasn't just a chant. It was ballroom-coded defiance, sharp and hypnotic. But mainstream radio didn't know what to do with him. Too experimental, too queer, too unapologetic. Cats refused formulas. His music blended techno, trap, spoken word, and threat. Projects like Less is More explored isolation, fetishization, hypervisibility, what it means to be seen as spectacle but not supported as story. He spoke openly about being used by systems that never fully embraced him, celebrated for a moment, then discarded. Zebra Cats doesn't make music for comfort. He makes it for confrontation. A reminder that queerness in hip-hop isn't always bright pop rebellion. Sometimes it's darkness, art, and rage, refusing to be translated. Sid, the quiet revolution in a love song. Sid never made a big announcement. She didn't need to. Born in Los Angeles in 1992, she emerged through Odd Future with a calm presence that contrasted the chaos around her. Later, as the lead voice of the internet, she helped reshape modern R&B into something softer, more intimate. But what made Syd truly radical was her honesty. As an openly gay black woman in a genre built on straight romance, she centered queer love without spectacle. No metaphors, no hiding, just tenderness. Her solo album Finn felt like a whisper that hit harder than a shout. Songs like Body spoke directly to women, rare, gentle, unapologetic. Some questioned her commercial reach. Others wondered if queerness limited her audience. Syd kept writing anyway. She proved that revolution doesn't always roar. Sometimes it simply sings the truth and lets the world catch up. Kevin Abstract, the gay voice hip-hop couldn't ignore. Kevin Abstract never waited for permission. Born in Texas in 1996, he co-founded Brockhampton, the so-called boy band that shattered hip-hop's rules. From the beginning, Kevin made one thing clear. He was a gay black man and he wouldn't edit himself. In a genre still uncomfortable with queer openness, his lyrics were fearless. Songs like Junkie confronted homophobia head-on, turning pain into confession, confession into power. He rapped about kissing boys, losing friends, growing up in silence, not for shock, but for truth. But visibility came with weight. Kevin has spoken about anxiety, isolation, and feeling tokenized even as he broke ground. Still, he kept creating. Kevin Abstract didn't just represent queer hip-hop. He helped redefine what masculinity in hip-hop could be: vulnerable, honest, unafraid. These 25 artists didn't just make music. They survived silence. They rewrote history in a world that tried to erase them. From hidden love songs to dance floors that became sanctuaries to viral moments that shattered the internet, every one of them changed what freedom sounds like. So here's the question. Has the industry truly evolved, or are we still catching up? Comment the artists who surprised you most. Hit like if their story moved you. And subscribe for more untold legends they never taught us about.